shades of gray, sunshine like it's May, and you're ready to seize the day outside. Got your hustle to and fro, making moves that no one knows, turn it up like you're supposed outside. When I come home, girl, and it's just me and you, throw the whole world away and do what we do. Looking outside, you might be confused, 'cause you don't understand the house rules. Attached, hit the coast and come right back outside. Everybody knows your name, and although it ain't the same, know you're really glad you came outside. When I come home, girl, and it's just me and you, confused, 'cause you don't understand the house rules. Shack, rock-a-bee, shack-a-fit to go. 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 I said shack, rock-a-bee, shack-a-fit to go. Shack, rock-a-bee, shack-a-fit to go. Shack, rock-a-bee, shack-a-fit to go. Shack, rock-a-bee, shack-a-fit to go.
What up, everybody? This is James, and we're talking about the scourge. We're talking about it because we have to talk about it. And it always, like, whenever I talk about it with anybody, like, all of a sudden, like, your eyes get all dark and it's just like, all right, how's everything going? Are you okay? I'm like, no, it don't have to be that way. It's okay. Colon cancer sucks, I promise. But there's a couple of things that you can do to prevent it. The first thing you can do is know your family history and tell your family history. Your family doesn't talk enough. Y'all don't talk enough. We didn't talk enough. Y'all don't talk enough. I didn't know that I had cancer running through my family on both sides. I honestly had no idea. So if you have colon cancer within your family, please let your family know. Learn your family history. Tell your children. Let everybody know so they'll at least be able to, take care of themselves. In my community, in the Black community, it's worse. We're more likely to get colon cancer. We're more likely to get it younger, and then we're more likely to die from it. So if there's anything that we can possibly do to stop it, we should be doing it. And we can. Talk to your family. It's better. The second thing you can do is go get screened and tested, especially if you have it in your family. It's 100% preventable if you do. Call your doctor, get a colonoscopy, or you can get the at-home Cologuard test, and there's other ways to get screened and tested. But if you go and do it, you don't have to deal with this. I'm looking directly in the camera. Go to the doctor. Go. Third, Be your own advocate. So if you're at the doctor, let them know that something's wrong. If there's a problem with your body or something that you feel is going on, make sure you go and don't wait. Make sure you go and talk about it. Be your own advocate. At least for you, you don't have to go through this. You can get tested. You can get screened. You can make sure that you don't have to deal with this mess. There is no logical reason to not do it. So the only reason I could see is that it's an emotional reason, which I would like to tell you, if it's an emotional reason for you that you have to not do it, listen to me. If you don't have to go through this, you don't want to go through this. And guess what? There's a way for you not to have to go through it. I can promise you that at the very least, you'll be in a better situation than I am. So you don't have to deal with this. I promise you don't want to deal with this. It's the worst. So get checked.
Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for a webinar that's entitled Your Health, Your Voice, Knowing the Signs of Colorectal Cancer and Taking Action. My name is Dr. Sophie Balzora, and I am co-founder and president of the Association of Black Gastroenterologists and Hepatologists, and a gastroenterologist myself. We're here tonight to honor James' legacy. We're here to talk about colorectal cancer, the rising rates in young adults, the disparate rates in Black individuals, and how we can be our best advocate when it comes to our health. I'm joined by an incredible panel tonight, and we're going to have a fantastic discussion that we hope will leave you knowing more about colorectal cancer and telling your friends and loved ones the importance of prevention and screening, and to know the signs and be attuned to your health. So first, we have Jennifer Jones. Thank you for joining us. Colorectal cancer survivor and the first Black Rockette at Radio City Music Hall, and an author. And I'm excited to talk about that tonight. Thank you for coming. Next, we have Radar Ellis. Thank you, Radar, for being here. A man of many talents, DJ, producer, musician, and also a professor at Berklee College of Music. Thank you. Next, we have Ayla Casey, wife of James and caretaker as well, who is the co-chair of the Health Equity Advisory Committee at the Colorectal Cancer Alliance. Thank you, Ayla. And then finally, we have Dr. Pascal White, also a gastroenterologist and co-founder and board member at the Association of Black Gastroenterologists and Hepatologists. Thank you, Dr. Pascal.
Thanks.
So with no further ado, I do want to jump right into it. And Ayla, I'll start with you. You know, that video that we started with was incredible. And I know many of us have seen it, and some people tonight are seeing it for the first time. But tell us about James.
James was an incredible light, and it's actually kind of hard for me to say was because I still feel his presence with me all the time. But he was an incredibly disciplined musician and a incredible friend, an incredible partner, and you know, he was the type of person whose presence lit up every single room that he was in, and he was incredibly generous with himself and his spirit and his talent.
Yeah. I think that, you know, even with first connecting with James, you know, I got that sense immediately. You know, the way he volunteered his time, especially when I met him, which was when he was in the thick of his battle with colorectal cancer. And, you know, in asking him, how are you able to devote your time, like, during this time, you know, when people are prioritizing their relationships with people that they know and love, and you're donating your time to be an advocate. And he said because he wants no one else to go through what he's going through. So he was, you know, it was within his power to do everything he could, which was just incredible to me, not even the musician part of things, but just as a person. So for you, I know you've known James for such a long time, and we talked before, you know, before this was this webinar was starting. So can you tell us, you know, some memories about James? What first comes to mind when you think of him?
Yeah. James and I, we go back to being classmates at Berklee College of Music. And I don't remember the first day I met James, but I remember the energy that he had when we'd all hang out. There was this thing called the Berkeley Beach where it was outside of the main building, which is 150 Massachusetts Avenue. And that's where everyone would meet between classes. Back then, people would smoke cigarettes outside, you know, and just talk about the last gig, the next gig, the rehearsal, what class you're passing, which one you're failing, who broke up with who, whatever. This and that. And in that time period, you know, you're in your late teens, early 20s, you know, to be friends, all it took was, oh, you like that music? Cool, we're just down now, you know? And I remember there was this group called the Foreign Exchange, which was Fonte and Nicolay, and they had put out a record. And we used to bump that record, just all of us, our collective, you know, our crew of Berkeley musician homies who were in the know about that group. It was like, oh, okay, you know Foreign Exchange, all right, you're down, we can hang.
Right.
It was that, it was Snoop Dogg, Rhythm and Gangsta, it was, you know, all these different jazz records that we were absorbing, and it just became this thing where we just were hanging out all the time, doing gigs with each other. And yeah, that's really how I got into being a pro musician, looking at someone like James, specifically James, because, you know, when you're a college student, you're trying to figure out, all right, are these the last years of me being a kid or the first years of me being an adult? And James was steadfast already in the first years of being an adult. So he was someone that I looked to model after, because he was always, all right, what's the gig? What do I need to know? He didn't waste time with a lot of things. You know, he would have fun and hang out and all that, but I just always looked at him like, okay, James is about to go practice. Man, I should probably go practice. Yeah, those are some of the early memories I have. Just having fun with him on campus, gigs off campus, and just looking to him like, oh, this is how you do it. This is how a pro musician prepares, you know? And I saw the proof, because he'd go out and he'd just kill it on stage every time.
Yeah.
I've never seen James be bad.
Right.
He was always good.
Yeah. That's great. And so Jennifer, for you, I know that, you know, being somebody who had to deal with everything that comes with a cancer diagnosis, so you and James had a special relationship in that way. Can you tell us how you and he connected?
Yes. James and I connected through the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, and he was doing his own album, and they connected us because he wanted a dancer and doing a video. So we came together doing that. And I feel so blessed about that, because we both were on the same journey, and we got to express our creativity in a way. And he also brought in other dancers who were battling cancer, and there was just this amazing energy in the room that we all had love for music and dancing, and we were making something so great, and we were there because of James, and it was his idea, and it was his music, and it was so beautiful.
That's wonderful. And I also like the fact that, you know, he brought in others who were dealing with cancer that was not colorectal.
Yes.
You know, so I hear like a common theme of, you know, inspiration and kind of the way that he would connect people. Dr. Pascal, I know that when James was on our webinar in 2023, you were moderating that webinar. Can you tell me what that was like and having that experience with James?
James was just, he was just such an inspiration, honestly. Like, he made everything fun, even though he was telling a story that, you know, touched us in different ways in terms of like his struggle. Like, he had a way of bringing out like the best in everyone that he touched, right? So I felt so privileged and so honored to have been a moderator for that event. And one of my fondest memories, obviously, of an ABGH event was moderating that webinar with James, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. So I remember when I first met you and James, it was at, I think, Red Rooster, right? And I remember being easily and quickly humbled when I was like, I don't know if you've been here before. He's like, I've played here many times. But, he's, you know, he did not. He was very gracious, which I appreciated. And, you know, and then immediately, you know, just kind of spitballing ideas about how ABGH and he could work together in this whole kind of theme of art and advocacy. And so I'm, you know, I think it's important to go back to where his story began as it relates to colorectal cancer, because another challenge, which I'm sure you'll go into, is just the time during which he was diagnosed and how that added an extra layer of difficulty along the way. So can you tell us about when he was first diagnosed and what that was like?
Yeah. He and I had just moved back to New York from Hawaii, and we were literally like weeks back, like we were living out of boxes, and he had just gotten back from a gig where he played at Red Rocks, and in a lot of ways it was kind of a historic gig because there weren't a lot of in-person shows happening at that point in time, and he's at Red Rocks, and there's like, I don't know how many people. I think that's an 8,000 pax venue or so. And so it was the first time being around that many people in so long. And when he got home, even while he was there, he was just like, I'm not feeling that great. But that type of place in Colorado, like a lot of people experience altitude sickness and lots of like interesting kind of symptoms if you're not accustomed to that environment. But when he got home, it persisted, and it, kept getting worse. And I think maybe by day 3 or so that he'd gotten back, we were like, okay, let's go to the emergency room. And just having Googled like what it could possibly be based on what he was feeling inside of his body, he was like, I think this might be appendicitis. And that was like kind of the trigger point, like, okay, we need to go take care of this.
Right.
And so we went to the emergency room, and, they were pretty certain it was also appendicitis based on what he was describing. But they did a CT scan, and it was like kind of the vibe changed pretty immediately. And, with respect to the doctor's sort of demeanor. But at that point, they just sort of urged and said that that he needed to schedule a colonoscopy right away, and sent him home with antibiotics. And it was, within another 5 days or so, we'd been back to the emergency room. At the third time, it was emergency surgery, and they did the surgery, and of course, we were kind of told that with as much certainty as they could give that it was cancer. And from then it really shifted the course of our lives, like we were coming back to New York to sort of restart where everything had kind of gone to a standstill, especially in the music industry. And he was looking at 6 months of chemo, and that type of chemo was not going to be amenable for him to travel and be on the road. And so, he's he took a tour off. He had a tour planned right after that, and he took that tour off, and was able to perform a few shows locally, which was like such an incredible sort of like salve to his spirit. Like every time he got to perform was so special and transformative for him. I remember the first sort of like bigger show that he did while he was still on chemo during those first few months was at Radio City Music Hall.
Oh, wow.
And it was just the emotion was palpable in the room. Like, I feel like there wasn't a dry face in the whole room. Everybody was touched by what he was able to express on stage.
Yeah. Wow. I know that's hard to share, so thank you. So Dr. Pascal, in hearing that story, and unfortunately stories like it, I imagine, tell us what a gastroenterologist is, what you do, and especially as it relates to colorectal cancer.
Sure, yeah. So gastroenterologist is a medical doctor that specializes in digestive disease, whether it's your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines. We focus on the GI tract itself, right? So anyone coming in with symptoms or complaints, they usually come to a specialist like me, in which I can work their symptoms up, so to speak. So with regards to colorectal cancer, that's a cancer of the colon or the rectum or the large intestine in its entirety. And these types of cancers, unfortunately, are becoming more and more common in younger people. That we're seeing a rise in early onset colorectal cancer, which is definitely something that is alarming to us as physicians, and something that everyone should be aware about. So happy that we're doing this today and talking about this for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in thinking about how James was feeling, especially at his age, I mean, he was around 38 when these symptoms began. What are some of the things that we recommend people think about or not ignore, or, see a healthcare professional about?
Absolutely. So symptoms of colorectal cancer can range from feeling abdominal pain that's just out of the norm, having a change in bowel habits, for example, more constipation or diarrhea. So everyone is their own normal baseline, but if anything is off of that kind of center for you, that's really an alarm symptom. We think about patients who are really fatigued and are very weak. Sometimes it could be a sign of anemia. So you can have a blood test and you can find yourself to be anemic. That's actually concerning. And anyone who's losing weight, right, that's not planned. If you were not trying to lose weight and you find yourself losing weight, that could be something that's definitely alarming too. And then we always think about blood in the stool or rectal bleeding. I always tell my patients that it's not normal to have bleeding. Right? It could be from something that's a benign cause or not cancerous, or it could be cancerous, but it's definitely not normal. So you should definitely talk to your doctor about any of these symptoms that are happening. You may not have all of those symptoms, but certainly if you have those symptoms, you should see someone.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think especially knowing that, now we're seeing, 1 in 10 people who are diagnosed with colorectal cancer
Yes.
under the age of 50, which is incredibly alarming. It's not just a random phenomenon. It is something that we have been seeing over the years, and it's getting more and more talked about, but definitely not enough, which is part of why we're here tonight, right?
Yep.
And I think, in thinking about how James was had to visit the emergency room 3 times, do you think that that's part of that? I know you said, wow. So tell us, is that being talked about in people under the age of 50 or friends of yours? We're here to normalize everything that people don't want to talk about as it relates to digestive health. So maybe you guys aren't talking about it, but I hope that you're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a conversation that's coming up more?
Is this?
Either of you guys, I think. I'm sorry. I think I definitely want to get into your cancer diagnosis as well, but I think especially for you, Brian, can you tell us what James's diagnosis has done in terms of conversations you've had with your friends and family?
Yeah, I mean, when right now our friend circle, our group is, either entering their 40s or they've been there and they're kind of getting that halfway point in their 40s. And so, yeah, these are more frequent conversations, especially with the passings of, different heroes in the music industry that die of this, and, people that we grew up on. So it's definitely something that's become more of the conversation. Anytime one of us is aching a little bit, we all have that thought in our head, all right, are you okay?
Yeah.
And just do the check-in, do the homie
Right.
check-in.
Yeah.
You eating right, you sleeping enough. It's something that is just a part of the conversation now, in addition to, all right, so what are we playing tonight? And
Yeah.
where's the after party?
Yeah.
It's just okay. It's a couple things that happen when we cross that threshold. It's, are you taking care of yourself? Are you sleeping? What's up with your checkups? It's, where's the after party? And what's going on with the kids?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's great. I mean, that's how we normalize it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you talk a lot about love in action. That's what that is checking in on each other and not being afraid to kind of express that you care about those things.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, tell us a little bit about, what your life was like leading up to your diagnosis and how it kind of impacted you and your family.
Yeah. With my diagnosis, I was vegetarian for about 25 years, active every day, considered the healthy one in my family. And I had just turned 50, and I knew I was going to go for a colonoscopy. I knew it was that time, and I just started to feel off, a little bloating, a little discomfort. And I'm like, I just 50, maybe I'm allergic to gluten, I'm going to take gluten out of my diet.
Right.
And so I started micromanaging my diet to see what was happening. When I ended up going to a doctor, I knew something was wrong. And and she, looked at me and I said, I think something's wrong. Can you get a colonoscopy and an endoscopy quickly? She said, you look healthy, you're fine, And I went to the screener to schedule my appointment and I said, can you put me up kind of close because I feel like something's wrong? She's like, 2 weeks. I was like, okay. So I went in to get screened and I looked at the time on the clock when I went under and she said 15 minutes. And then when I came out, I made a note to look and it was like 25 minutes. And I was coming out of anesthesia and she came into the room and she said, you have cancer and you have about 5 years to live. Wow. And I'm still coming out.
Anesthesia.
Yeah, and it floored me. And I told no one in my family for a month because I was ashamed and I was embarrassed and I was the healthy one. And in that month, I was going for screenings and blood work and everything. And I was with a doctor and I went into his office and I just saw pictures of his family on ski vacations and at a beach. And I did not have any conversation with him about my health or what the next steps were. And when I finally told my family, my older sister said, you need to go to Sloan. And so I went to Sloan. And when I walked in, met by an almost all-female oncology team and surgical team, I felt halfway healed. You have to be so comfortable with your medical professionals to have that comfort, to know that they're looking after you and your health. And my surgeon, after she did her look-see, she sat back and she said, okay, what did your other doctor tell you? And I said, he didn't tell me anything. And her mouth just hit the floor. And then she drew a diagram and she said, this is where your cancer is. And she diagnosed me, and then I felt so much better, and she told me how we were going to treat it. And you have to just know what you're dealing with and get the best care possible, and that's what helped me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's a lot to discuss there. I wish we had more time. There's so much there.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I know you just put out a memoir, so congratulations.
Thank you.
An author, and I'm so glad that that's getting a lot of traction because in your memoir, you write about your disease, and I wonder how you got from a point where you were so kind of terrified and you felt ashamed about telling your family to then becoming an advocate and being in James's video and being so public with your diagnosis.
Well, I think I feel the same way that James felt. If I can help one person not go through this horrible disease and get screened and let them know what's happening, it's happening in younger adults, in the African American community. If I can save one person, help one person, that's what I want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, how selfless. I mean, that's really...
And it's hard conversations. They're not easy conversations.
Right.
We have to talk about things we don't want to talk about, and people come up to me and I'm like, oh, okay, let's talk.
Talk about it.
What do you want to know? What do you need to know?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
No, that's wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah. And it was one of the themes of what we're trying to put forth is being your best advocate, being your own advocate. And I struggle with that sometimes because I do think that we shouldn't have to be, right? And I especially think for Black people, it is not just an anecdote, right? It is something that is been seen time and time again in the literature and the data showing that we're treated differently in the healthcare system, and for that reason, it is even more important for us to be our own advocate and have people in our circle, right, who can advocate for us. So that's really tough, because I don't think we should have to be, but we need to be. And so, Ayla, in James's journey, what did that look like, and what challenges did you encounter with that?
There were so many times that we looked at each other throughout this journey and we were like, if only we'd known this a few months ago, then we would have been more prepared to be able to handle this, or maybe this outcome would have been different. We had that conversation a dozen times or more.
Yeah.
We didn't have the same experience that you had, Jennifer, in terms of feeling supported by our medical team. And we changed medical teams. I want to say, like, part of the reason why we felt, why there was such an instant connection with ABGH is because we felt supported. And we hadn't felt supported in any medical spaces throughout kind of the whole journey. It was a rare thing, and to have information be given sort of upfront and transparently without having to try to fish for it. Because the thing is, like, we didn't know what we were fishing for.
Right.
And it was only once we got deep into the journey that we, like, started to figure out what we were fishing for. But then, you know, the situation was changing so quickly. So, you know, it was a challenge. I spent, you know, towards the latter end of the journey, I was spending hours and hours and hours just reading every day, just so that I would know what to say when we were in these conversations with doctors. So I think that was really the crux of this be your own advocate, because you don't know what you don't know until you have until it's revealed that you don't know something, and you don't know what you need to know.
Yeah.
So it's really just an effort to try to support others in not having to face what James faced and what I've faced as his partner.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Pascal, so from the GI lens,
Yeah.
right? And I think especially in the context of your practice in New York City, I'm sure you've seen people as a second, third, fourth opinion. And I think that for me, I can say a lot of times people say, I waited, X, Y, and Z months because I wanted to see a Black doctor. I wanted to see a female doctor. I think especially for gastroenterologists, very sensitive areas, sensitive topics. What if you could give like your top 3 tips to be your own advocate? What would they be? Like if you could tell patients.
I think Ayla touched upon it too, just acquiring knowledge, acquiring a lot of insight into your disease, such that when you sit down in front of the doctor and you're having this conversation, the doctor that's for you will welcome those questions. The doctor that's for you will kind of put you in a space where you feel comfortable. This is a safe space to talk about things that you wouldn't talk about with anyone else. So first and foremost, reading about this disease, reading about your symptoms, that's something that off the bat will help you feel a little bit more comfortable with the conversation you're going to have. The second tip I would say is potentially, if you can, have someone else in the room. I think that a lot of the times when I ask my patients, is there anything else? And they say no, their partner or their caregiver will say, well, no, didn't you tell me that you had,
Right.
a belly pain overnight the other day? And like, oh yeah, I did, right? So someone else who's outside of the situation that can kind of gauge, if you're comfortable asking the question, then they'll kind of nudge you and say, hey, you may want to bring this up to your doctor. Yeah. And the third tip I would say is to follow up. Some people say no news is good news. I always say we are human. We are sometimes busy. Sometimes, the medical records are imperfect. If you don't hear from me, please call my office, right? Because sometimes these things can get lost in translation, right? So closing the loop of communication and making sure that we're in constant on the same page is something that I always ask my patients to advocate for yourself for, because, sometimes we may not, have the actual time to sit down and get to things right away, and things may slip. People are on vacation, things of that nature. So, making sure you're reading up on things, making sure you have someone else in the room if you can, and closing the loop of communication are the top 3 tips I can say.
That's really helpful. That's great. And I think we will revisit that because those little tips can actually be very impactful when it comes to your health. And Radar, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and because I do want to get into the kind of the nitty gritty of the different screening methods and prevention, because thankfully, for the majority of people, colorectal cancer screening is preventable, it's beatable, and it's treatable. But the caveat is if it's diagnosed at an early stage, and I think that for young folks, that's the tough part, because a lot of times the disease is more aggressive, and by the time people come to their doctor, they have had symptoms for some time. But there's a lot of stigma there. There's a lot of stigma around, feces, going to the bathroom, farting, belly pain, bubble guts, all of it, and having a colonoscopy. I think particularly with your male friends, as much as you're comfortable sharing, like, do you find that there's a stigma there? Like, do you find that people, that men in particular, are kind of very hesitant to get screened and get tested? And what are those conversations like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different thing being in the group chat or talking with your bros, because it's all just trying to maintain a certain level. And again, we're in our late 30s, early 40s, so a lot about what we talk about is the things that we need to do. And a lot of that revolves around the household or the next thing that we have going on. We talk about a bunch of things, but at some point, I make it a point at least, and so do some of the other bros in the chat, like, hey, I just went to the doctor, I got my checkup, where you at with it? And it's just those little things, it's less like you need to go and just kind of remind you, I did this, so let's, where are you at? Like, did you go to the dentist? Did you go to this and that? And then, before you know it, the group chat turns into this checklist, and hopefully they made their appointments and did what they need to do, but it's not something that we just open the conversation with. It's normally like, we got to talk about basketball a little bit, who's beating who and the seating, and then we got to talk about, yeah, exactly. Like, we got to talk about what food we're going to cook next time we hang out, what kind of drink we just had, stuff like that. And then like somewhere in there, it's like, hey, so what's up? Like, you go to the doctor, and having kids now, it's easier for those of us that do have kids, because we can use the kids as the lead-in. Oh yeah, just took my son, for his checkup. Where you at with that? How you doing?
Yeah.
So yeah.
But doesn't having kids, it sort of like desensitizes all of the
The ick.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely been something that isn't just like the first topic, but it's something that is less of, it's not like a knee-jerk reaction when you bring it up, because we all recognize, hey, we're getting older. We all are in a unique industry, because 90-something% of the guys in the group chat, we're musicians. So, you're flying to different countries and in different time zones, and you're up in the air in this pressurized 10 thing called an airplane for however many hours. And then you got to go do this show and a sound check. So it's really easy to get caught up in the loop of, some cats don't even know which time zone they're in for a couple days. They got to get readjusted. And it's like, all right, now I'm back home. Okay. How long am I home for? And then when do I have to leave again? And so in between that, it gets tricky, but, we just try to make sure we're all eye level with each other.
Yeah. But it's hard. I mean, there's the priorities of life, but I think sometimes the health part, gets lost, even though that ought to be a priority. So it's hard, but I think you're fortunate, and I'm curious to know what role James played in that you guys can have those conversations, even if it's not the first thing you mention.
Yeah.
Because I can say in my experience, and Dr. Pascal, tell me if you feel the same, I feel like there is still surprisingly a lot of stigma around a camera being inserted rectally, inserted into the anus, butthole, whatever you want to call it, booty hole, as I know Tony Baker likes to call it, to look inside. And I think, it's important for us to normalize that conversation and talk about the fact that there is a stigma. And I think in particular communities, that stigma might be greater than others. So what are some of the ways that you destigmatize or kind of, bring people down or calm them down?
One of the interesting ways I think one of my patients was calmed down was I walked into the room, and that day I had my scrubs and my Jordans on, right? He was like, you're definitely going to do my colonoscopy. I'm like, why? He's like, because you got the ones on. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's meeting people where they are. And just letting them know that, again, this is a safe space. I want you to talk about your poop. I'm going to give you a poop chart. It's called a Bristol stool chart. Point to what your stool looks like, right? Just kind of normalizing. And I think for younger people, it's hard to kind of wrap their brain around the fact that they're getting older.
Yeah.
And also, if they're not of screening age, which is 45 at this point for everybody, unless you have a high risk of having, colon cancer in your family or advanced polyps, that could be much younger, like around 40 years old. But at the end of the day, just making sure that they understand that I'm here for you. Where are you with this in terms of your screening readiness, for example? Are you okay with undergoing anesthesia, taking a day off from work? Are you okay with, having a camera, an invasive procedure, but I'm looking right in your colon? Yeah. If I see something, I'm gonna take it out, right? And some people are like, you know what, I'm not really quite comfortable with going to sleep for this. Can I do it awake? Or just kind of figure out what their barriers are, right? Because everyone has a different thing that's kind of slowing them down from achieving, the ideal screening time frame. And we want everyone screened on time, right? Mm-hmm. Because we know that screening on time is like the biggest way to try to prevent these small little growths called polyps becoming, big angry cancers. Yeah.
And Jennifer, you commented that you were screened. You had your colonoscopy around the time of screening age. I mean, now it's 45, right. But at the time that you were diagnosed, you were closer to 50.
Yes.
So, what was I know you said you kind of had an intuition that the news wouldn't be good. Mm-hmm. Did you share that with when you shared that with your doctor and you got the message that you received? Like, what was that like?
When she told me, "Oh, you look healthy," I think you're going to be okay. It was kind of like a relief because I thought she's the doctor, she would know, And then when I saw my first surgeon, and he really didn't say anything, and nothing about, chemotherapy or anything like that, I was like, well, how bad can it be?
Yeah.
And so stage 3, colorectal cancer, when, my team, the team that I felt comfortable with, they told me, stage 3, and I was just like, oh my God. And then I thought, they gave me the hope that I could see my kids get older, get married, see my grandchildren. I started to get those visions back of, maybe, after learning stage 3 and them saying we can do this, maybe I can see that, And I also, during my chemotherapy treatments, I really had to take a hard look at my life. And I was like so stressed out when I was like going through getting, before my screening, financially, my home, my kids were in college. I mean, I was like going through the ringer. And even still, if I get stressed out, I hold all of that in my stomach and I have to really take a step back and figure out what's happening. So I took a step back and I said, what relationships are serving me? What situations are draining me? And I had to let some friends go. Some situations I had to just take a break from and turn my back. And I just did this whole revision of my life and what I really wanted. What did I want in life? What was I here for? What's my legacy going to be? What mark am I going to leave on this world? And I really had to change my thought process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes a lot of courage, I think that, kind of forces you to be courageous in a lot of ways. Did you ever give any feedback to that physician?
Well, no, I never, I just asked for my medical records to be transferred.
Right. So I do want to get into screening, right? Screening and prevention. Thankfully, there's a lot of different methods, a lot of different ways that we can screen for colorectal cancer in average risk individuals. Dr. Pascal, can you touch upon some of those?
Sure. So we always think about the colonoscopy, which is one of the camera tests that looks into the large intestine, but there are other ways to get screened. We think about stool testing. right? There are many different types of stool testing, two of which test just the human blood in the stool, and another one that actually tests not only for human blood, but also abnormal or altered DNA cells, called that stool DNA testing. Different ways or different intervals, I should say, of how often you can get those stool tests, right? Either 1 or 3 years, but as long as you pick one and you get that test done, that's the most important thing. We think about other tests like a CAT scan, called that CT colonography. And if you find any abnormalities, let's say on the CT colonography or the stool testing, that automatically puts you in a category of having to get a colonoscopy, right? So we always tell our patients, you can choose a stool test, you can choose a CAT scan, but if there's anything that comes back positive, the colonoscopy is the next step too. Before we used to do a flexible sigmoidoscopy, that's just looking at one side of the colon, the left side. It doesn't look at all the way around the colon. So that's kind of fallen out of favor a little bit. But for people who want to have a quick look, that's still an option that a lot of our guidelines still say is okay.
So that's very helpful. Thank you. I know that the standard age for people who are average risk is now 45. And I always like to say to people, everyone is at risk for colorectal cancer, right? There's not really such a thing as low risk. But there are certainly people who are at high risk. Can you talk about those groups and what people should watch out for who are listening?
Sure. First thing we think about is family history. Like, know your family history. Part of being an advocate is also asking your family, hey, does this run in our family? Is colon cancer a risk for us? There's certain genetic syndromes that people are born with that can also predispose the patients to having higher risk. We call those Lynch syndromes or, polyposis syndromes, people who form lots of polyps. But then there's also what we call like modifiable risk factors, things that you can change in your life that could predispose you to having a higher risk of colon cancer. Number one is smoking, right? We think about those who have a high intake of alcohol as being of higher risk. We think about people who are sedentary, who are not, active, having an active lifestyle. So there's a lot of things that we can be in control of, things that we can't be in control of, but those that we can control, I always emphasize to my patients, these are the things that we're going to focus on.
Yeah, that's great. Living an active lifestyle is something you can start doing today to increase to lower your risk of colorectal cancer. Stopping smoking, as Dr. Pascal had mentioned, drinking in moderation. Also, eating a high fiber diet is known to be tied to lowering your colorectal cancer risk. Limiting red meat consumption is a big one. And I know you mentioned you were vegan. But even so, people can live the healthiest of lifestyles. And unfortunately, everyone is at risk, which is why everyone should get screened. But by far and away, just as you had kind of gone through the different screening methods, getting screened at the correct time, starting at age 45 if you're average risk, and even sooner if you have an increased risk, like you mentioned, in addition to things like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or other chronic diseases that might increase your risk. It's so critical to get screened. So I think that is something that is a misconception, is that, I eat healthy and I'm of a good weight and I exercise every day, I run marathons, like I don't need to get screened, which is something that people do here. So screening versus a screening test versus a test that you do in response to symptoms. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So screening is when you have absolutely no symptoms at all. You don't have any complaints of abdominal pain, all the symptoms that I talked about. Once you start having symptoms, then we think about diagnostic testing, meaning we're doing this to diagnose what is going on with you. So it can still look like a colonoscopy, but when I go in, I'm looking for a reason why you're having this rectal bleeding, or I'm looking for a reason why you're having this abdominal pain. I'm looking at the lining of your colon to see if I see any types of inflammation or ulcerations or things that are abnormal that I can biopsy and let you know why you're having these symptoms, for example.
That's very helpful to know. So Radar, when James kind of maybe he pitched it to you or he just told you what he was thinking about this unique idea of combining art and music and advocacy. Like, how did he present that to you, or when you saw what he was doing, what were your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, this is right in line with who he is. James was always trying to figure out how to, because we work in the service industry, right? So like being an artist, being a performer, you go out on stage and you're there to give an audience that energy. You're here to give them something they can go home with to better themselves in their day, in their life, or even just for that hour or two that you're performing for them. And, you know, I also have to do sidebar shout out to Brady Watt, because he was a homie. Some of his stuff is in the auction as well, but he was one of our homies in that circle who had cancer before James did. And so, you know, our whole circle of musicians, we were all about advocating for musicians to work. It was through this company that my best friend Meghan started with, called Revive. She got the money because James got the settlement. He got hit by a car and got this money and helped start the company with that. And you know, so it was all this circle of musicians that were all about, all right, we're on stage and we're performing, and yeah, it's cool, we're getting paid for it, but like, what happens after that? You know, where's the tangible thing that the people, whether they're, you know, people in a club or going to a school, you know, which James has done before, you know, and talking to them about life, about the future, about their plans, their goals, all that kind of stuff. And you know, when this came up and he was doing this advocacy, I'm like, this is right in line with what he was doing. Because even in the pandemic, you know, when people were trying to figure out, all right, what do I do? Musicians, tours are shut down. You know, you got an album, you can't promote it. You can't do what you normally do. His first thought was, I'm going to create a live online situation where a bunch of musicians can have their own room, this thing called Aux Chord Live, and I'm going to make a place for all these musicians to be able to perform, so everyone can go to one central location and rock out. And he did that with the thought of, this is going to help my music community. This is going to help those cats who have the cabin fever, who are stuck in their rooms. They may only have like limited amount of gear, but we'll figure out how to present your show. And I DJ'd for a couple of those nights, and the talk the entire time going into the show, after the show, all that was just, all right, is it gonna look good? How is this? How are we setting this up? Because they're performing with this thing. It was never really like, this thing is gonna make a lot of money, and then after this pandemic, we're gonna, you know, blast and blow it up. And it was always, all right, how is this going to serve the musicians trying to get their message out, and how is this gonna serve the people who are, you know, need some good entertainment? And so this is just right in line with that step. It's just like, oh yeah, he's just continuing this, but in a different capacity now. You know, you could say it's like Michael Jordan, The Last Dance. It became personal with him.
Yeah, right, totally.
And he just flipped that switch, and it's like, all right, I'm going to drop 50 on y'all, you know? And that's what he did to the last day. Yeah. Even like the last time I saw James, it was, I also teach at the New School in Union Square. And we had hung out a couple weeks prior. We were going bowling, and James showed up as a surprise, you know, and it was homie Angela, Nikki, who you saw earlier. She was there, my wife, my kids. We all went to Brooklyn Bowl, had a great afternoon, and James showed up. And I was trying to think of, because I had a class of seniors, and they were doing their final project, and they were all like creative. So it was like, all right, some of them are making an album. Some of them are, one of them was making this whole like suite that was based around the planets, and, you know, each movement was a different planet. And one of them had this multimedia plan where she had like this whole video presentation to go along with her performance. And, you know, James pulled up, and I was like, hey, would you mind coming to class talking to my students? Because you're out here, you're doing all these things, you know, you've done amazing work in the field. And, you know, someone, like I said earlier, he's someone I've seen who always kind of had his compass pointing in the right direction, you know, in terms of being a professional, in terms of being cool to hang with, in terms of knowing the material, and just, you know, keeping a good mind about himself. And so he came to the class and talked to my students. It was the last day of the class. And that was the last time we hung out. So even him just pulling up, even he was sick, and a few months later he was gone. You know, so he was in the latter part, the last few months of his, but still found the energy to like, all right, let me go talk to radar students, let me pull up to these seniors, talk to them about life, careers, and he just kicked it the entire time. It was like a 3-hour class, you know, and he showed up in the beginning, and he was present the entire time. We played his music video, we talked about life, about things and all that, and it wasn't even a talk about cancer or anything. It was just like, all right, what can I tell to these students that will get them prepared for, you know, going out into this real world, becoming taxpayers, and having to rely on their talent to do that, to pay their bills and to pay their rent.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's everything that he did with this cancer screening and advocacy. It's just who he was. It's that whole time, because we'd do shows in clubs, we'd pull up on schools. We had like the big band that we were in, shout out Revive Big Band. The Revive Big Band that we were in, we'd play the Apollo and have like school children come through and we talk to them about music and being in a band. So yeah, it was never like, it was all just in line
Yep.
with everything else that he was doing with his day. He treated every opportunity like it was like Radio City, like you're thousands of people, cool. It's a room full of school children, we're gonna give them the Radio City, you know, amount of attention and care. Yeah.
I feel like I see, you know, everybody's face lighting up, but I mean, that is,
That's who he was, man. That was
amazing.
my boy.
yeah.
That's my dude, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what a gift to those students.
Yeah.
So when you hear that, you know, I imagine it's a beautiful thing, and it's, you know, it's hard because it takes a lot of physical and emotional effort, right? So what was that like to, you know, to be there during those times when he wanted to do all of these things, but was going through
He did
the cancer
everything.
journey? Yeah.
Literally everything. And, you know, we talked about in the opening of this that he was so generous with his time and his spirit. I mean, those last few years, we were unplugging his chemo and getting on a plane immediately after. And he was performing 4-hour shows that night. He even performed a few times while he was on chemo. And, you know, he had his little, like, fanny pack. And sometimes he would tell people and sometimes he didn't. It was interesting because, like, I mean, of course, I knew acutely, like, intimately well what he was going through, but not everybody knew what he was going through. He would curl up, take a nap in the green room, and sometimes I would wonder if he was going to be okay on stage. I was, like, a few feet away from him, like, just, like, I don't know if he's going to be able to stand up right now, like, knowing the amount of exhaustion that his body was going through. But he found it
Yeah.
somewhere within him, and he would light up the room, every single room he was in, whether it was a classroom or a 10,000 person venue. Like, he was fully there with all of himself. And he wanted to do everything. Like, he wanted to be there for everyone, and he put so much of himself into his relationships because that was everything to him.
Yeah. And I think, you know, with this auction that you have, like, brilliantly put together, which is so fantastic, to raise money for people who need colorectal cancer resources through Fight CRC is phenomenal. And I think, you know, the outpouring of support from people that he played with, people that knew him, and I think people who even just knew him very peripherally. It's so obvious. You know, we hear your stories of all of you guys who have connected with him, but it's just, you know, his legacy is incredible. And it's so evident of how much how grateful he was and how people have given love back to him. So, you know, I welcome you guys to kind of give maybe your final words for things that the audience should think about, to kind of empower them to be their best advocate, to tell their loved ones and close ones and day ones to get screened, and to pay attention to symptoms, and anything about your journey that you think may benefit others. And, you know, the conversation is ongoing, right? It definitely doesn't end here. But I want people to leave just getting some nuggets, you know, kind of retold to them before we close out.
I guess I'll start. So I was teaching a class this past weekend, and I was reading about, you know, a doctor's first, like, year of being out of residency or fellowship. And one of the doctors says, be humble or your patients will humble you, right? When a 30-year-old comes in and says they're having bleeding, you're not thinking hemorrhoids, right? You're thinking that this could be something else. And so when I, you know, hear James's story, when I hear about how brave he was and how much he gave back, I really try to humble myself and put myself in the position of listening to these young people coming in with these symptoms and letting them know that we're going to get to the bottom of it. and making sure that they're a partner in their health journey.
Yeah, that's huge. Hila?
I would, I guess I would just double down on being your own advocate. And if something doesn't feel right in your body, there's wisdom in that. Listen. I didn't touch on it earlier, but I do want to say it now that in the, James's diagnosis blindsided him. Colorectal cancer was not on his radar or mine for that matter. He was 7 years younger than the recommended screening age when he was diagnosed at stage 3. But in hindsight, he said, the level of exhaustion that I felt over the last few years is not normal. I thought it was just part of getting older. And he was able to identify some things that should have been red flags, but weren't. He just thought, it's COVID, I'm stressed out, there's an unusual, life circumstance happening right now, and so perhaps my body is responding unusually. And I think back to a conversation I had with Dr. Pascal where there are certain things that should never be ignored and that, should never be considered a normal body response in any circumstance.
Yeah.
So I would just want to leave that sentiment with everybody to, our body is our greatest resource that we're given in this life, and it's the most valuable thing that we will ever have. Take care of it.
That's a great message. Thank you.
Talk.
Radar.
I want to talk to the fellas real quick. Which one my camera? Which one? Down
Please
right there.
do. Please
Fellas, look, listen to Sade, all right? Love is stronger than pride. Love yourself enough, push the pride aside, go get your checkup. Look, me, myself, I just went and got a physical like a month ago. I'm about to go like through my whole hot boy summer, just doing all the workups. My semester's over in a couple months. I'm gonna be home for like 3.5 months. Like, do the right thing for yourself. Get checked up. It's not whack, it's not weak. Go do that thing, stick around because there's a lot of life to live. Hopefully you live it. That's it.
Can I just add that self-advocacy is self-love?
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely. I'm loving these messages. Thank you. That's so true. Jennifer?
I just want to piggyback on what everyone else has said here. Get screened, know your family history, have these hard, difficult, uncomfortable conversations because it does save lives.
Yes. Thank you all. I know this, these are tough topics. It can be tough to talk about, these challenges. And, every time we mention James, there's always this kind of light that enters people's faces and their smiles. And I think that, what he has brought together and what he's continued will definitely save lives. And I know that there are people who have come to us, in the ABGH community saying that these types of things are so helpful. There can never be enough conversations because it really can impact how people behave and change their behavior for the better. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you, everybody. You can find on www.blackingastro.org some great resources for, as a patient, how to be your best advocate, how to speak up at the doctor's office, different colorectal cancer screening methods, and just learning more because that is incredibly powerful. And so we do also encourage you to fill out a webinar survey. We want to know, how this resonated with you, what can we do better, and how can we better educate and reach our community. So thank you very much, and take care of each other, and good night.